When someone first looks at this case or hears about this case or views this case, you might think that this family needs, some caregiver support, some medical help, there's mental health issues. But as you get closer and as you, find out more about the situation, you may learn, for example, that maybe there's a child living in the home. Maybe, in fact, that they've run through all of their resources and they're about to be evicted. Maybe, in fact, there is a need for an order of protection. Maybe there is some violence going on. And so the more that you learn about a situation, you can begin to see how complex these situations really are. And it really may involve, the healthcare systems, mental health, civil legal services, criminal justice, law enforcement, adult protective services, child protective services, victim services. It could really just expand. Right. And so, so then there you are. You've gone from maybe thinking this is kind of, something that could be resolved just by you giving a consult to a doctor to, oh my, we have all of these systems.
If a case comes to the team, there's many systems that are involved who sit around the table. Adult Protective Services, Department for the Aging, elder abuse service providers, there's geriatricians, we have geropsychiatrists, we have people who focus on legal issues. We have civil legal individuals who are represented. We have the DA's office also if there's a criminal element. All of these people, and we have shelter systems who can also sit in and help weigh in if that is an option for a victim. So we're a pool of resources that sit together to develop an action plan to really help somebody and move things along.
What's so important is that when you're working on your own, if you're a doctor or if you're a nurse or a social worker or an attorney, you don't necessarily, your organization or you as an individual, just don't have those resources. So it's unlikely that in a social work, social service agency that there's going to be a geriatrician or a geropsychiatrist or a forensic accountant around to help you discuss that element of a case. So to be able to bring those resources to a community is so important.
And also having all these professionals working together, closer relationships, building better rapport so it's easier to call somebody about a case, run things by them. You're really networking and working together.
In terms of complexity, in this case, clearly there was, it seemed like there was neglect. Mm-hmm. We don't know about other types of abuse. There could have been some physical abuse. Psychological abuse clearly was going on. There might be some financial exploitation. So when you think about complexity, it's also that there are these co-occurring types of abuses, and in order to resolve the entire picture and to reduce the suffering and increase the safety, we need to address all of that.
So anybody who's really had contact with this victim and worked with them in some capacity will be invited to the MDT, will sit, give their perspective on the case. And then the person who is referring the case will develop some questions for our team. What do they need help with? What are the things that they're struggling with? And even as a team, we may come up with other things and say, well, you haven't quite thought about this. What about this element? What about this aspect? We'll also look at ethical issues in the case as well. And try to resolve those. So again, getting everybody around the table, making sure that we're all coordinating our services. Some of these cases you'll find people duplicating services or people just falling through the cracks, which is often the case. And we really want to make sure that we use these scarce resources really effectively. So after a case is presented at the MDT, there is a date given for a follow-up. It's usually anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks after the initial meeting. And prior to the end of the meeting, I'll list tasks for people to follow up on. Some cases are reviewed many, many times for many follow-ups, so it could go on for several months depending on the complexities of the case and where we're at. Other cases may only need to be reviewed once or twice. It really just depends on the need of the case. People feel vulnerable when they're bringing cases to the MDT. They're laying all of their work on the table for everybody to judge or view, and it's a scary process. Yeah. So really helping them prepare, outlining what they've done, who they've worked with on cases, what are their questions, what are they struggling with, what does this victim really need, what do they need help with, because their agency may or may not do those specific tasks. So the New York City Elder Abuse Center also provides a lot of training to community agencies, and that's to help them really detect the problems, look for red flags, identify types of abuse, and discuss what resources are out there in the community for them, one of them being the New York City Elder Abuse Center multidisciplinary teams.
The New York City Elder Abuse Center seeks to prevent abuse and also to improve the way professionals, organizations, and systems respond to the needs of elder abuse victims in New York City. So the New York City Elder Abuse Center has 3 multidisciplinary teams, and one of these teams is called the Elder Abuse Case Coordination and Review Team, affectionately known as ECRIT. And what we do is we bring together professionals from across disciplines and systems to discuss complex elder abuse cases together, because no one professional has all the answers. So when I say we bring professionals from across disciplines, there are lawyers, social workers, physicians, administrators, adult protective service people, criminal justice. Responding to elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation cases almost always involves a team. To respond appropriately, we need to work together. It's very difficult and oftentimes impossible to respond to these situations alone.
Welcome everybody. We have a case today that Ariella from JASA is going to present in the case of Mrs. G. I do want to remind everybody that everything we talk about in this case is confidential. We have changed some of the details to protect the confidentiality of the client, and hopefully we can give her some suggestions around things to do in this case.
Mrs. G is a 75-year-old woman who lives alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. The client contacted JASA to request assistance in evicting a tenant, Mr. L. Mrs. G said that she allowed Mr. L to stay with her because she had fallen behind on her rent since she no longer has her husband's income. He never paid his rent and refused to leave. A more serious incident then occurred. Mrs. G walked in on Mr. L rummaging through one of her handbags. She said that when he realized Mrs. G saw him, Mr. L pushed her against the wall and punched her face. Mrs. G was near the front door and because of her safety plan knew to escape and head to a trusted neighbor who took her in. The neighbor accompanied Mrs. G to a local hospital and at Mrs. G's request called the JASA LEAP social worker who met them at the hospital. Mrs. G was being evaluated and treated for a fractured jaw and a broken rib. However, she told the doctors that she fell. She told the LEAP social worker that she was concerned that Mr. L would retaliate against her in some way if she reported him to the police. So some assistance that we're looking for at the LEAP program is, first of all, is how do we proceed with the client, because there's concern about her safety and where can she go, and we're also concerned about her financial situation. She had credit cards that there were some issues with, there was money missing, so we just need some assistance in how to move forward with the case.
Starting just from her medical issues, I mean, I think the way that we can be most helpful to her is to, first of all, be in touch with the medical team at the hospital right now and make sure that they are fully evaluating her. And I would even argue, since we know she's already had physical and psychological abuse and financial, that she should be explicitly asked about sexual abuse as well. I mean, these tend to travel together.
I would recommend, and we can assist with, immediately restricting access to her checking account and putting holds on her credit cards.
Mrs. G is likely to need ongoing psychological support. That is something well beyond the details of a safety plan, which is immediate. She's been seriously traumatized, and she's justifiably, realistically terrified at this point.
A rib fracture is something which can be, and I'm sure the defense attorney for this individual will make use of her chief complaint in the emergency room having fallen. A rib fracture is something you might see in a fall. A jaw fracture is not an injury that one sees in a fall.
And we would certainly encourage her to trust law enforcement we would certainly try to get an order of protection. When you were talking about convincing her to file charges. We would sort of take that choice out of her hands if we could and say, you're a crime victim. If it makes you feel safer, we'll announce in court that you're reluctant to go forward, but that the state of New York are going forward and get the order of protection so that, you know, the potential defendant hears that and he realizes it's not her choice, so he shouldn't be threatening her, but that we're going ahead.
And I do think that that would probably be the best situation, especially since she is reluctant. So knowing that the DA can do that, I think that would definitely alleviate some of the pressure on her.
Without a doubt.
So, Robin, before I know we want to deal with the financial and also medical care, but I also would like to see her get released safely from the hospital. And I think, Liz, that might mean an order of protection, getting that in place. If she gets ready to go home, she wouldn't be able to safely go home if he still has access to the apartment or is living in the apartment. So I think we would need to think about two things. One, down the road, a housing court proceeding to make sure he's excluded permanently as a roommate, but first an order of protection for her so that she could safely go home. And if she's not safe to go home, then perhaps a Weinberg referral or getting her some access to shelter before she goes home.
You're sitting in your office and you're trying to think of how do I best respond to this. You may come up with a couple of ways forward, but it may not be as robust as when you're sitting around with professionals. People are smart, they're dedicated, they're experienced. So when you bring talented people like that into a room, great things can happen.